I think we'll go ahead and get started. They don't have a moderator for me. I'm not that important. But I'll go ahead and get started if I figure this out. All right. So my name is Mike Mays. I'm the State Historic Preservation Office Survey and State Register of Historic Places Coordinator. Today I'm basically just going to be discussing a combination of what we do with the National Register of Historic Places, various terminology that we use, what goes into the survey work that I do, and along with a little bit of what exactly it is that we do at SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So I'll be using the latest thematic survey that I did on Oklahoma's Calabooses, or tiny jails, as they're also known to be described in different aspects of the National Register, what goes into survey reports while detailing the history of our tiny landmarks. Oh, sorry about that. That was me. All right, so in 2023, SHPO conducted a thematic survey to document all tiny jails, standalone jails across the state. This survey would also be used to create a multiple property document, MPD form for the National Park Service. So this MPD is intended to provide context for individual listings in the National Register of Historic Places for tiny jails constructed in Oklahoma from 1904 to 1940. 1904 to 1940 is the established period of significance for the tiny jails, but there are a few jails that fall outside of this established time period. This is a picture of the jail in Texola, which is on the Texas-Oklahoma borderline out in western Oklahoma. So before we dig into the survey report, a quick rundown of the National Register. What is the National Register of Historic Places? The National Register was established by Congress in 1966. Basically, it's a catalog of buildings, structures, sites, objects, and districts that are significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, or culture. This was established and is ran by the National Park Service through Regulations 36 CFR Part 60, who govern the National Register nomination process. So we establish it here at the state level. We have a board of directors that meets. If it's approved by our board of directors, then it's pushed on to the National Park Service, and then they either say, yes, we agree with this, or they'll send it back to us to be modified. But eventually the process ends up from state to federal. What all can be listed on the National Register? The most significant properties identified in the surveys are nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. The federal list of properties deemed worthy of recognition and protection. So this includes buildings designed to house people and their activities, sites, location of activities important to history, structures that are designed for the purpose other than containing people, and objects primarily small in scale, often artistic districts. An example, that's right in the middle of the Pioneer Woman statue. And I'm kind of speeding through this. We're a little behind, so if I go too fast, just throw something at me and I'll slow it down. So what are the criteria for listing in the National Register, and why this survey on tiny jails? First, the four criteria. So criterion A, that are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of history. The second one is that are associated with the lives of persons significant in our past. Criteria C, that embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. And criteria D, that have yielded or may be likely to yield information in prehistory or history. So most Calabooses in Oklahoma deemed eligible for individual listing in the National Register qualified under criterion A for community planning and development and law, and criterion C for architecture, either a 1 or a 2-room jail. The Camargo jail, shown here in Dewey County, is eligible for National Register listing under Criterion A, Community Planning and Development, and Criterion C, a one-room jail. So it's not always about the pretty structures, the big, beautiful mansions. You would look at this and you would think, really? But we'll get into that. 1- and 2-room jails are a building that can be eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places so long as it meets the necessary criteria. So here, Manitou Jail, built in 1922, is listed in the National Register for its historical significance under Criterion A and for its architectural significance under Criterion C. This was built in 1922. The Tamahaw Jail was listed in 1980. At the time of listing, it was the last remaining building associated with the town site of Tamahaw. The jail is located near a ferry landing on the Arkansas River and was one of the earliest port towns and trading centers for the Choctaw Nation in Indian Territory. The Tamahaw Jail was built circa 1895. The Scullyville County Jail was also listed in 1980. At the time of listing, the jail was the only extant building associated with Scullyville County government in the Choctaw Nation. The jail was built in 1888. You can note the similar stone construction that we saw in the previous slide to the Tamahaw Jail. The survey report notes that native stone jails are predominantly located in the eastern half of the state. This is the Canadian Jail and Livery Stable near the town of Canadian in Pittsburgh County and listed on the National Register together in 1979. The jail also dates to the territorial period predating 1907. The concrete roof was later added in 1912. This was originally a 2-room jail. When I did a site visit in 2023, I noted that the interior wall has since been removed. They're using this for storage of weed eaters and stuff like that to clean the grounds up. This is a brick and concrete structure measuring a mere 4.5 feet by 7 feet. Also of note, when I made the site visit in 2023, I observed that the livery stable that was associated with this is no longer extant. So they demolished this sometime. I looked at aerial maps. Within the last 20 years, they have demolished the livery stable that was attached to this. Where that metal building is behind it was where the original livery stable was. So how and why did this project start? In late 2022, the State Historic Preservation Office received inquiries regarding the, this thing is not working. Here we go, sorry about that. In late 2022, we received inquiries regarding the Calabooses in Marble City, which is in Sequoyah County, shown here. The Marble City Jail was built in 1911. It's a poured form concrete construction and also not all that different in style and construction as the Manitou Jail we saw earlier in almost the opposite corner of the state. It also has a 2-bed bunk inside and a poured concrete pit toilet. The Marble City Jail is recommended individually eligible under Criterion A and C. We also began receiving several inquiries from other towns. SHPO has also come across this resource in other survey work, most recently in the survey of the all-black towns undertaken by our office. At the onset of this report, SHPO designated documentation of standalone Calabooses as the basis for the survey. Some non-standalone jails as part of a larger city hall were also documented, and it became apparent that we needed to begin documenting these resources as no survey had been previously recorded. Thus, the Tiny Jail Survey was born. As part of the Thematic survey, a detailed historical context that covers information about the period, place, and events that created, influenced, or formed the backdrop to these resources is developed. The historical context for the Calaboose survey includes information on early native systems of justice, construction methods, and types of jails, causes of and needs for holding facilities and development municipalities. SHPO thematic surveys are available at this link that you can see here on the slide. The Dokesville jail shown here is the earliest known remains of a jail in our state. You can see the 3 cells right here, and then this would have been an office area. This is we do have the Dokesville site from a previous archaeological site survey. We keep those files in our office. We don't publish those for various reasons, such as looting and things like that. Municipalities across the Twin Territories began building calabooses as early as 1840. In the early 1800s, native tribes located in the designated Indian Territory and in a clash of cultures would have to replace their judicial system of honor with a European system of incarceration and would eventually be forced to close the tribal courts due to the federal Indian policies that sought to weaken and defund the tribal governments. Prior to the opening of the unassigned lands in 1889, both the Indian Territory and the Oklahoma Territory would have a need for immediate housing for both local lawbreakers and those being transferred to federal facilities in Kansas and Arkansas. Lawmen prior to this had to either tie their prisoners to a tree or a porch post, or in some instances they had to house them in their own homes overnight. Municipalities in the state began building simple wood frame or combination sod wood calabooses as early as the 1840s. Only 4 wood frame jails are known to still exist. Skidee, which is shown here in this picture, Chickasha, El Reno, which is the former Darlington town site, and Gary. Skidee, shown here, is the only one remaining in its original location, which makes it extremely unique as it is eligible under Criterion A for community planning and development, Criterion C for architecture, a 2-room wood frame jail, and Criterion D due to its archaeological setting and providing information on the construction methods of wood frame jails and materials. So this one here is still the way it looked when it was built. In 1904, the only difference, if you step inside, there's at some point somebody had used this to house their hogs, and they had cut the interior wall, a little square area out to let them roam in and out. This is probably one of my favorite ones, and if you go to Skidee, it's on private property. The owner's usually around the area, and he's happy to let you see it, but take some tick repellent. Found out the hard way. The Calaboose in Gary is the earliest known wood frame structure still extant. However, it's no longer in its original location. This one's been moved 3 times now. Prisoners would have to rely on the deputy or local townspeople for food and water. If they were lucky, they would have access to a bucket for a latrine. While lumber shipped in on railroads to the Oklahoma Territory in the west or obtained from local sawmills in the eastern Indian Territory made for a quick fix, they were not the most secure, and as noted several newspapers, not the safest. This style of jail no longer exists due to their naturally organic decaying and because most communities removed them or sold them to be replaced by more secure concrete or rock jails as the community continued to grow. When I was doing a lot of the research on this through newspaper articles, it was not uncommon to see a local town site would post jail for sale. They were selling these old wooden jails. A lot of the farmers would come in, buy them, load them up on their trucks, and haul them out and use them for storage and things like that. Very easy to move. That's why there's not really that many left in the state. I would venture to say that there's probably a handful of them that are still around, but they've been moved to private property over the years. If they haven't decayed, they could still be standing, that were being used as storage and things like that. The problem with wood frame jails was that they were not secure and dangerous to those being held. Attempts to break out of wood frame calabooses by means of burning one's way to freedom was apparently a problem nationwide. Before writing The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain worked as a syndicated columnist in Nevada, where in one of his monthly stories he described some of the inhumane and one inmate's attempt at freedom. These are just a handful of newspaper articles describing the attempts of prisoners in Oklahoma attempting to burn down their holding cells and attempt to escape. If you can remember this one down on the bottom left-hand corner, if you can see that. This is talking about the Verdon jail where a man attempted to burn his way to freedom. Probably not the best choice, but we're going to look at the Verdon jail here in a minute, so remember this. What was the methodology for locating these calabooses? So one method is Sanborn and Clarkson insurance maps. These maps help identify the location of jails, dates of construction, and the materials used in their construction. Sanborn and Clarkson maps show numerous communities shortly before and after statehood with ironclad calabooses, as indicated by the 1960 Sanborn of Foss. So the calaboose is depicted by, if you can see it there, it's got a yellow color that denotes it as a wood frame. And then it has gray around the outside. It's kind of hard to see this. So that gray basically states that it's a wood frame, but it has an iron exterior, which would be our corrugated metal that we have that you see today. These jails would have typically contained a metal cell inside that was not attached to the wood frame and metal exterior. Newspapers and insurance maps combined are also helpful tools in determining a building's provenance. So while the sign on the Verdon jail would lead you to believe that it was built in 1905, its build date was 1932. I have no idea where the 1905 comes from. The town was established in 1908. Maybe somebody just had some inaccurate information.
Is it the street number?
It's not even the street number. I don't know. I spent several hours looking through this, and I just gave up. I'm like, I don't know what. So this is the 1909 Clarkson insurance map, and this article from 1932 helped verify the build date. So if you remember that article that we looked at earlier from the Chickasha Star in 1927, it describes a jail that was not fireproof in Verdon. This one obviously is. So that tells you, number one, that this jail was not built prior. And then the circle on the map here of this Clarkson insurance map shows a wood frame building that is in a completely different shape or footprint from the jail. So you can see that backwards L shape. It looks nothing like that. So that tells you right there that this building was not there in 1909. Prefabricated metal cells were a big business during the late 19th and early 20th century. While metal cells make for good tourist attractions, they're a bit misleading as they do not completely depict how these early holding cells would have looked as noted in the previous slide. So while metal cells make for good tourist attractions, they're a bit misleading as they do not completely depict how these early holding cells would have looked as noted in the previous slide. The metal cell in Foss, which is this one here, and then the double cell located in Perry were originally housed inside a wood frame building with metal or ironclad exterior. The one here in Perry was actually in Caw City. Whenever they flooded the town of Caw City to make way for Caw Lake, they took the jail and donated it to the museum there in Perry. Companies that provided metal holding cells promoted their product in catalogs including E.T. Barnum, Champion Iron Works, Capital Iron Works, Stewart Jail Works, J.R. Anderson and Company, and the Pauley Jail Company, which is actually still in business. The Pauley Jail Company built the four-man still at Foss that we saw earlier. Pauley Jail records indicate they provided cells to the city of Caddo in 1888, Guthrie in 1890, and over 65 other town sites, including Oklahoma City and the police station there in 1951 and 1962. These are some brochures. I contacted Pauley Jail and they sent me, this was the very first brochure that they were sending out. They had salesmen that went across the state promoting selling their jail cells. They would, if they wanted the prefabricated, they would load them up on a rail car and ship them in and then build an exterior around them.
Where was Paul?
St. Louis, Missouri, and they're still there. The calaboose located in Vera, Washington County is the only known calaboose of a wood frame with metal or ironclad exterior design still in existence. So you can see from the picture, the jail has a separate metal bar entry right here that leads into a double cell with individual cell doors. It should be noted, when I visited this, there was at the back of this, and I don't have a picture of it that I presented here, but the back of the building had another opening to allow ventilation. Yeah, it'd be very hot. Tarleton in Pawnee County is an excellent example of a metal cell housed in a concrete exterior. The calaboose in Tarleton is also the only known example of this metal cell that's housed in concrete. I wasn't able to gain access, but I stuck my camera in through, and so you can see right here the cell that's separate. It's not touching the interior concrete. A lot of this was also to help the deputy who was arresting for their protection, so you could have a way to put the prisoner in and then take them out of their clads, handcuffs, whatever they had. The door here on this jail also had a peek-through door where you could slide in food if you needed to do something like that. This was built in 1916. At the onset of statehood, expansion of municipalities meant the immediate need for these tiny jails, and with it came a reformation of how we treat our incarcerated individuals. Kate Bernard would become the state's first commissioner of charities and corrections, and she was also the first woman elected as a state official in 1907. The duties of the commissioner would eventually be taken over by the Oklahoma Department of Corrections in 1979. Bernard's first annual report on the condition of Oklahoma's jails, including the tiny calabooses, would be published in 1908. This report covered 6 months of working with the defectives, delinquents, and dependents of the new state, and covered the topics of prisons, forced labor, and mines. What a lot of jails were doing here in Oklahoma, they would send their prisoners up to Kansas to work in the mines. Oklahoma inmates were shipped to Kansas as punishment. Juvenile prisoners, the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, hospitals for the insane, orphan homes, county jails, and local city jails. Bernard's comments on city jails are less than flattering. She notes in one inspection of a city calaboose that the city holdover is a disgrace to civilization and that few holdovers have any provisions for water, night buckets, or beds, with most cases being full of filth and the only bedding a few rags or straw thrown in the corner. Bernard's interviews of inmates indicated that a majority of prisoners had been in city and county lockups for 6 months to a year, in some instances due to a 2-year backlog of court cases. Children were incarcerated with the adults. There is, however, no indication that I came across that anyone was held in these smaller calabooses for more than a night. Bernard's political career came to an end after drawing the ire of Governor Murray when she began to advocate on behalf of Native Americans who were cheated out of their lands during her investigative work reporting on the murder of Osage tribal members. Murray would convince the state legislature to defend her office, and then ending Bernard's short but stellar career. She is buried here in Oklahoma City at Fairlawn Cemetery. The growth of local municipalities was funded through Senate Bill 263 as an emergency clause attached to Oklahoma Statute 442 in 1919 that would appropriate sinking funds for the use of the building of local courthouses or jails. This is the period when we would see the largest increase in construction of formed concrete jails that are still extant across the state. This is actually the jail in Bennington, Oklahoma. It's in really bad shape. Made of native rock. The owner, it sits on private property. The owner's been fighting with the city for a long time now. They want it demolished. The city doesn't want to do it. It's going to fall down eventually anyways because it's just in bad shape. By 1920, town sites had begun building holdovers of formed concrete with steel-barred ventilation openings and doors. These concrete calabooses are typically a simple square or rectangular design with either a flat or a slightly convex or barreled roof. Electricity and water lines appear as later additions to some of these calabooses. This is the jail in Strang, Oklahoma. You can kind of see here in the picture right here, and then this is the same side. They came in at one point and added electrical conduit. There's a light inside, so the inmate could actually have a little bit of light. Some of them I've ran across have water lines that were later additions ran into them for toilets, drinking fountains, things like that. Concrete calabooses are either single cell or double cell designs. Double cell calabooses are typically separated in the middle by a small hall that separates the cells or has a separate front reception area. Some articles mention prisoners being held in one cell while the deputy used the second cell as an office. So this is the one in Inola and the one in Wayne. These are one cell, and then down here this is the one in Choteau, and it's a two cell. This is the entry hall right here, so if you walked up to the front door, the first thing you would see. Covington, Sentinel, Canute, and Weber's Falls are all examples of two-room designs. So Weber's Fall Calaboose, which is this one right here, has two cells with the front reception area. I might add that the scenic view of the river was not available to the inmates, as there is no ventilation opening facing that direction. Does look beautiful, but the Covington jail up here has a hall in the middle that separates the two cells. The community of Covington has pitched in to maintain its calaboose. They poured a concrete walkway around it. Covington's two-room jail had running water and working toilets during its heyday as part of a community-involved oh my God, this thing is freezing up. Yep. As a community upgrade in 1947. The Covington jail is currently going through the nomination process for the National Register. This is the interior of the Covington jail. You can see a wood-burning stove right here to keep them warm, and then there's the toilet right there. Pretty nice. There's a lot of interesting stories I came across with Covington. There was a family around 1925 that got stranded in Covington, and so the sheriff went and opened up the jail to let the family stay there until they could find a house for them. There was another example of some kids who had jumped on a freight train and were making their way to Tulsa and got stuck in Tulsa overnight, so they also got to stay for free in the jail. Boswell City Jail is to date one of only two confirmed calabooses that were built using WPA funding. The second one is located in Granfield and is of a cannonball-style architecture. The jail in Freedom, Oklahoma was built using PWA, which is Public Works, in 1935. However, its original purpose was the town's pump house and later being converted into the town jail shortly after construction. The WPA was formed in 1935 as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal policy. Boswell and Granfield would use this funding to employ local citizens to build their calabooses. It's very possible that WPA funding was used to build other calabooses. However, I have not uncovered any records indicating thus far. This is the WPA Granfield Jail. It's a great example of local quarried rock used for construction and is the only known calaboose that exhibits a naturally formed cannonball rock exterior. The new jail, as you can see here, would be designated as the White Jail. Granfield's old jail, built in 1917, would be designated as the segregated jail upon completion of the nicer WPA-funded jail. These two jails sit roughly a half a block away from each other. This older jail is a contributing resource to the Granfield Downtown Historic District. Granfield was not the only town to have two separate calabooses during segregation. The community of Ryan has a two-room formed concrete jail that is still extant that was the designated White Jail, and then this cylindrical formed concrete structure that looks to have originally been a silo that locals claim was at one point modified into the segregated calaboose. This is kind of, somebody had went in and added this later, but you can see where the stairs used to be on this, and they had gone in and put some sort of an iron door right there, and then an iron cell right there. Research indicates that the leading need for these calabooses was centered around Oklahoma's prohibition laws. Overnight oil boom towns and the drove of workers looking to blow off a little steam with their hard-earned paychecks in hand created a recipe of lawlessness and the need for community drunk tanks. Oklahoma entered the Union as the 46th state in 1907 as a strictly prohibition state and remained under prohibition until 1959 when citizens voted to end the practice. This article describes the oil companies pitching in to build the Scheidler jail in part from the influx of oil field workers who were having a little too much fun. You can't really see the interior of this. On each side of these, there was poured concrete about 2 feet off the ground that was used to bed, and then there was a toilet in the middle. Not much privacy. Mabel Bassett would continue Kate Bernard's fight for reform of the prison system and local lockups, such as is noted in this 1938 article describing Disney, Oklahoma's system of tying prisoners to a tree before having built a designated calaboose. Disney's founder at the time made the statement that his community was financially handcuffed, providing schools, streets, and sidewalks, and that the tree was really not being used as a jail, but as a penal hitching post. I'm picking up either some sarcasm or just a regular politician. Disney in Mays County is one of the later calabooses to be built in the state. This one was built in 1939. During the survey report, SHPO documented 105 jails. 86 of these were standalone, 7 were the metal cages like we saw in Foss, and then 12 were non-standalone. Build dates range from as early 1800s Dokesville to the 1940 Granfield WPA that we saw earlier. The jail in Cache is kind of the outlier. It was built in 1960.
When you use that number, you're talking about ones that still exist as a structure.
Total. So I researched even ones that are still not standing. So those dates also contain the ones that are no longer around.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Some communities made use of their vacant calabooses for other purposes. A newspaper article in the Ponca City News mentions Burbank's calaboose sitting empty for the most part, save for a bear that was captured by a local resident on a hunting trip in Minnesota. The locals mentioned the bear's cry when hungry sounded like a woman's cry for help. Newspaper articles often make light of locals who were unfortunately incarcerated. Concrete block jail in Muldrow once held a local man who in 1919 rode his mule into the church after imbibing in a little too much white mule, which we would assume would be slang for moonshine. At least 4 calabooses are known to have been raised within the last 15 years. Okarche between 2008 and 2013, Porter between 2013 and 2023, Stillwell in 2021, and then Lyman in 2023. Lyman was the jail right before I started. Another gentleman has been doing a book on these calabooses, and he was out there in April of 2023 and got a picture of it, and then I was out there in June and it was gone. So the OERB, I was told, was out there doing work, and that was the last remaining structure for Lyman, and they took it out. So what happens with all this data that we collect? Development of historic context and period of significance, input to the Oklahoma Landmarks Inventory, which is this right here. It's a collection of information that we've compiled on thousands of individual properties throughout the state. Data is collected through various sources, including the SHPO's comprehensive survey program, the Federal 106 review process. This level of documentation for each property varies, but is providing a baseline for researchers and the creation of a multiple property documentation. So these are available online. If you want to look up your town, you can go visit the Oklahoma Landmarks Inventory, see what all we have documented. And I'll give you, at the end, I'll give you the links for that. A period of significance is established as part of the criteria for the National Register. National Register requires a period of significance that is associated with the discrete chronological period, i.e. the period of significance. So the period that we came up with is noted as the length of time when a property or properties were associated with important events, activities, or persons, and attained the characteristics that qualify it for the National Register. So after all the available data was collected for this survey, we established that a period of significance from 1904 to 1940 was established, which corresponds to the most pronounced period in which calabooses were constructed and used throughout Oklahoma. A calaboose being built outside of the period does not necessarily disqualify it from listing on the National Register. The jail shown here in Binger and built in 1925 sits vacant but is used by the community now as a tornado shelter when needed.
It's often needed, it's been here.
Yeah. The territorial jail in Guthrie is a great example of a resource that does not meet the criteria for the period of significance. Yes, these are the same building. While the jail is located in the designated historic district, it clearly no longer maintains historical integrity. The jail was built in 1892, which is well within the period of significance established by the survey report of the downtown Guthrie district. However, as you can see here, numerous alterations throughout its life have made the original building unrecognizable and is the contributing factor to it not being included in the National Register. So this corner right here is this corner, and then you can see the windows. So as you can see in the pictures, the building was covered in stucco in the 1950s. A church eventually bought this and converted it. An addition was added to the east elevation over here. The flat roof was covered with a gable roof. Numerous other alterations. So things like this will disqualify it. All right, so a quick recap, evaluation of the National Register, eligibility criteria. Association with significant events, association with significant persons, design characteristics, has yielded or may likely yield information important in prehistory or history. The property must also be able to convey significance or integrity through location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association. Not all 7 aspects need to be present so long as the overall sense of past time and place is evident. The Grayson Jail, shown here, was considered eligible under Criterion A, Ethnic Heritage Black, and Community Planning and Development. This was just recently listed on the National Register in January of this year. Ongoing efforts by the SHPO include a multiple property document, the National Register of Historic Places multiple property documentation form nominates groups or related significant properties. On it, the themes, trends, and patterns of history shared by the properties and organized into historic contexts and the property types that represent those historic contexts. This is the jail in Fairland, which is in northeastern Oklahoma. This is the only one that I've seen that had this type of rock exterior on it. SHPO also makes use of ArcGIS mapping for National Register locations, archaeological sites that are most often not publicly accessible, and other historically important sites across the state. This is a screenshot of the ArcGIS map showing the locations of every jail that I found so far. I found 105. More than likely there's some more out there that I do not know about. Red are the ones that are documented. Gray are resources we know about but was not documented due to time constraints. An interactive map is available through the website, the SHPO website. You can see this right here. This is a 0, not an O. I also can send this out to you, but this is a story map. You can expand this map. If you click on any of these dots, it will bring up the location of the jail, and then it will show you pictures of it as well. Got it? Good. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
You bet. Here's a few other resources. This is our website, SHPO website. It has the OLI that we talked about, the ArcGIS mapping, the Oklahoma landmarks inventory. You can go to look up anything that we have already documented. The story map for the jails is right here at this link, and it has the map that you can expand out, and it will show you everything. The Gateway to Oklahoma is a really great resource if you're looking to research anything. And then the Sanborn Maps and Newspapers.com. And I'll leave that up there so if anybody wants to screenshot it. Hi, Susan. That's all I got. Questions?